Hello, friends. This is going to be my review of Moldir, who is the second character to release in patch 2.8. So Moldir is a beast deflator support who excels in the current iteration of the Ultimate Team. She is created with the same vein as some of our highest value supports, such as Flutterpage and Aleph. When she gets rolling, she can provide a buff to her teammates that increases ultimate damage, crit and crit damage, and crit conversion to crit damage. Her kit can be a little confusing to understand because of the use of multiple terms depending on different conditionals. I've tried my best to order things in a way that it's clear for you to understand, but you might have to go back in the video to connect some pieces together to get the best understanding possible. So let's take a look at her skills. Her S1 is a single target reality damage attack that applies Passion Drain. It's a debuff that grants the attacker 1 Moxie after they hit the target. So it's first a debuff, then whoever follows up will drain a Moxie from the target. It also grants her the buff Continuous Action. So it's a combination of both applying a Moxie gaining debuff and increasing her team's action economy by 1. Her S2 is what I consider her signature ability. It's her primary way of generating readiness stacks for herself. It's a counter buff and it generates 2 stacks of readiness at rank 1 for 3 rounds, which due to the rigidity of the current ultimate team's cycle is most often the level that you will use the skill at. However, at rank 2 it generates 3 stacks and at rank 3 it generates 5. The riposte, meaning the counter attack when the counter is triggered, varies on the level of her total readiness stacks at the start of the round. So what is readiness? It's a buff that stacks up to 50. It lasts between 2 to 3 rounds, depending on whether she gained it from her Insight 3, which lasts 2 rounds, or her allies consuming Moxie, which lasts 3 rounds. The game checks your readiness at the start of the round. If you're at 10 stacks or higher, Moldir gains a buff called Assertiveness. If you're at 20 stacks or higher, everyone gains a buff called Tactical Coordination for 1 round, which increases ultimate damage by readiness stacks times 2%. If you're at 30 stacks or higher, everyone gains a buff called Armament Enhancement, which lasts 1 round, which increases crit by 30% and converts excess crit to crit damage when ulting. Going back to her S2, and this is where the difficulty in understanding her kit is at. When the riposte of this counter activates and you have the assertiveness buff, she will riposte with using her ultimate. If Moldir ripostes with her ultimate, Moldir gains 1 Moxie from Insight 3, and everyone gains stacks of a buff called Ceremonious Crit DMG. Everyone will get 6 stacks just from Moldir ulting, along with 1 stack for every 4 stacks of readiness she has. Moldir also gains a buff for 2 rounds called Doctrine, which gives Moldir a 20% ult damage buff but prevents her from getting assertiveness. When she does not have assertiveness, meaning when she has less than 10 stacks of readiness or doctrine, she will use her S1 to counter, which applies Passion Drain and provides continuous action. Her ultimate deals 400% reality damage and grants 6 stacks of Ceremonious Critical DMG buff to all allies. When Moldir actively casts this ultimate, it deals 700% reality damage. The buff that this ultimate provides gives 3% ultimate crit damage per stack. It's consumed when that character uses their ultimate. The summary from just her skills is as follows. She is the perfect support for any ultimate teams that use Moxie. She directly speeds up the ultimate cycle of her allies by providing Passion Drain and increasing their action economy by 1. She provides 2 separate multiplicative modifiers in the form of ultimate damage and crit damage. She also increases crit chance by 30%. She further boosts ultimate crit damage with her buff Ceremonious Critical DMG. So what teams can you use Moldir in? When we're discussing teams, in patch 2.8 and looking up to the current version of CN in patch 3.1, Moldir really only fits one archetype because her kit favors her allies quickly cycling their Moxie. The only real contenders in this niche is Recoleta and Melania. She directly surpasses Pickles in the position for the Ultimate Might team in terms of raw DPS contribution, coming in at 10 to 20% more than Pickles. Her total team damage contribution of the Ultimate team with Pickles versus Moldir is simulated to be around 50% more with Moldir. When talking about Moldir's portraits, I'll be separating it into 3 different tiers: meta-focused free-to-play, Dolphins with Recoleta, and Whales with Recoleta. Her Portrait 1 increases her S1 damage and extends the duration of the continuous action buff to 2 turns from 1. It smooths out her rotation significantly, as most of the time you want to be fishing and using her S2 to gain readiness stacks and countering with her ultimate. It also brings stability into the ultimate team's survivability, as you can include more heal incantations if necessary from Medicine Pocket, but bear in mind she is completely playable at P0. Her second portrait increases the buffs she provides from a potential 100% ultimate might to 150% and 30% crit to 40%, which can be converted if it hits 100%. Her third portrait gives her an additional Moxie when she riposts with her ultimate. This is more or less the most useless portrait that she has. Her fourth portrait increases her ult damage to 500% and the flat value of Ceremonious Crit DMG to 8 with every ult, up from 6. Her fifth portrait increases her ult damage to 600%, and when she gets the Doctrine buff from her riposte ult, it increases her ultimate might from 20 to 30%. For free to play, you do not need any of her portraits. For Dolphins, if you have Recoleta plus 140 pulls at the moment, plus you buy at least 2 monthly packages, her P1 makes the overall rotation of the ultimate team much smoother to play and is quite desirable. For Whales that have Recoleta, plus you don't mind buying crystal drops to pull characters, her P2 is the most beneficial portrait in that it provides a large increase to the buffs she can provide. But beyond P2, the gains diminish so sharply that I would not recommend even a whale go beyond this portrait level. So should you pull? Since this is the first review, I'll outline the factors that I use to judge whether or not a unit is pull-worthy or skippable until further enhancements in the form of Euphoria updates or archetype updates. The factors I use are, firstly, the meta viability. When talking about meta, I consider their archetypes viability, their ease of use to be played at the pinnacle endgame environments like 400 meters, 450 meters, 500 meters to 1000 meters. Secondly, I look at the history of units that are releasing in the future from CN that could potentially change the archetype's standing that increases a character's longevity or investment potential. Thirdly, I look specifically at the strengths of the unit beyond their team and whether or not their kit is self-contained, meaning they have a lot of role compression and can fit into future teams without too much adjustment being necessary. And lastly, I look at gameplay, whether it is fun to play, meaning it's satisfying to use the character in their intended way, and how much thought the developers put into designing the character, their kit, and their story. For meta viability, the Ultimate team currently treks somewhere between the top 6 and top 7, depending on how many Assassin's Creed teams you like to put in your meta rankings. The problem with the current iteration of the Ultimate team, and I say iteration because every single character uses a spender to use their ultimates, is that it suffers as a whole from low base attack values and strict card usage because of the lack of versatility spenders and having to use ultimates that fill up the card deck. There's the added downside of your deck being flooded with cards that are not needed to ramp ultimates, requiring the need to use the tuning disc to pull the correct cards. The team's defensive capabilities lie in its reliance on draining Moxie, which is suboptimal at best when talking about the hardest fights in the game. The potential is there to flip this with a switch just by releasing a unit without as much of a conditional ramp cycle as Recoleta. For longevity, looking at least 126 days into the future, we don't see any upcoming units that could potentially be viable in the Ultimate Team to be worthy of investing into Moldir this early. The weight of the score is 5 out of 10, which is the lowest in this category. For unit strength, Moldir is created with the same characteristics of Flutterpage and Aleph. Her conditional is, however, that the units need to be spending Moxie at a relatively decent pace. But for her role as a support, she has a significant amount of role compression in the form of buffs and continuous action AP that make her a top tier standalone unit lasting well into a year into the future. For gameplay, character kit, and design, as well as her story, her counter mechanic provides quite a bit of enjoyment, allowing the player to take multiple scenarios into consideration for achieving their win condition, but it's slightly dragged down by having to repeatedly watch her ultimate animation, which is subjective when it comes to the enjoyment value. The confusing structure of understanding her kit and how it is worded can also be considered a barrier of entry for some players, as they need to have in mind her breakpoints of 10, 20, and 30 stacks, and whether or not she has the Doctrine buff while she is on the team. Her total score being 29 out of 40 puts her in the watch and pull later category for my recommendation. There is a caveat though, in that if you already have Recoleta and have more than 140 pulls as of this moment, I would suggest that you pull if you do not have 4 teams that are close to completion. But for most everyone who will be pulling on Sharon next patch and Robuska in 3.1 and possibly even Sentinel in the next patch, I would pass on her to secure these core units first. With all that said, I will personally be pulling and or have pulled, depending on when you watch this video, as I enjoy playing the Ultimate Team.
Mission complete, no casualties. A perfect operation.
Till next time.